Welcome to Seems Like History, Season 1, Episode 3, Charity Brown's Lemoyne Star Quilt, 1880. My name is Loretta Allen, and welcome to the third episode of Seems Like History. I am a writer, independent researcher, and amateur quilt historian. In each episode of this podcast, I take a look at one quilt, the artist who made it, and the world that she lived in. If you feel the need to hear a brief history of quilting, you can find that at the beginning of Episode 1. So you may not think that a square of cloth and some stitches have much to say about history, but you'd be surprised. So come along with me as I take us to the Berkshires, where we drop in on life in western Massachusetts in the 19th century and find a gorgeous pink and brown Lemoyne Star Quilt made by a septuagenarian and wife of a prosperous farmer. With what rapture you behold, hovering over some vast hollow of the hills, or slowly drifting at an immense height over the far-sunken Housatonic Valley. Some lordly eagle who in unshared exaltation looks down equally upon plain and mountain. Or you behold a hawk sallying from some crag like a Rhenish baron of old from his pinnacled castle, and darting down towards the river for his prey. Herman Melville, Israel Potter. The state of Massachusetts lies on the eastern seaboard of the United States. Perhaps no other state in the country is as synonymous with the beginning of the New World as Massachusetts, owing in a large part to the founding of Plymouth, when the Pilgrims disembarked from the Mayflower in 1620 to find a lush, green, fertile wilderness. They also found the villages of the native inhabitants, people of many tribes, nearly empty, the population having been reduced by 95% from disease introduced by earlier visits from Europeans. There were many failed attempts at permanent European settlements in the New World, namely and most famously the Roanoke Colony in 1598, Popham Colony in Maine in 1607, and St. Croix Island also in Maine by the French in 1604. And the Pilgrims certainly weren't the first Europeans to take permanent root in the New World either. The Spanish made a permanent settlement in what is now St. Augustine, Florida in 1565. The Spanish also had permanent settlements throughout all of what is now Mexico, Central and South America, and they had founded what is called Santa Fe, New Mexico in 1610. About 600 miles to the south of Plymouth, Massachusetts, English settlers made a claim to a parcel of land in 1607 known as Jamestown, Virginia. But in the past, historians like to give credit to Plymouth as being the beginning of it all, probably because Plymouth didn't suffer from the bad reputation that Jamestown did. It's a lot more palatable to teach kindergartners about religious freedom and piety and the goodness of the native people, thank you Squanto, than it is to start them off with, the starving time and cannibalism in Jamestown, or with stories of Spanish cruelty in St. Augustine. But it's not as though the settlers of Plymouth, Massachusetts had it easy. The first winter endured by the Pilgrims claimed half of their population. But the Pilgrims settled in the New World to live in religious purity. They weren't there to pillage the land. They came and settled in family units, and there was a real sense of community welfare among them. There was a cohesiveness in Plymouth instead of every man for himself. And that bucolic image is what historians locked onto and transmitted to us in grade school. By 1640, the colony had more than 20,000 inhabitants of European descent. Events like the Boston Tea Party, Paul Revere's Midnight Ride, accompanied by William Dawes and Samuel Prescott, who sort of got left out of my first grade history book, and the first skirmish of the Revolutionary War at Lexington and Concord riveted people throughout the world, and it permanently established Massachusetts as where it all began. It was where the world changed. But after that, after all the uprisings and battles and events that would become legends within the American consciousness, Massachusetts became the very image of a new England. Western Massachusetts seems almost magical with its rivers, streams, and varieties of trees. About 60% of the state is considered forest land with over 70 species of trees. In the summer, away from the cities, Massachusetts is an impenetrable wall of green. And along the very west end of the state, running from the southern border to the northern border, is Berkshire County, lovingly known as the Berkshires. In the early 19th century, though, there were farms with sawmills, grist mills, and over 33,000 miles of stone fences erected by the European settlers. Throughout the state of Massachusetts in the mid-1800s, a community of writers led by the likes of Thoreau, Whitman, Emerson, Dickinson, Melville, Alcott, and Hawthorne would make literary contributions that would elevate American literature to the world stage. In the mid-19th and 20th century, America's elite built summer cottages in the picturesque landscape as well. In the southern Berkshires is the town of Egremont, which was incorporated in 1760 and lies just to the east of the Taconic Range. Egremont is just a stone's throw from Great Barrington to the east and Monument Mountain a little further north, and it shares a border with the state of New York to the west and Connecticut to the south. The subject of this episode, our quilter, is one Charity Ann Millard Brown, born in 1805 in Connecticut. Her family moved to the western edge of Massachusetts shortly after she was born and took up residence in Egremont. Charity's parents, Joshua Millard Jr. and Mary Clark, were staunch Baptists. The couple had 5 children: Edmund, Joshua, Charity, Abiah, and Lydia. At the time of Charity's birth, Thomas Jefferson was president of the United States, and the borders of America were expanding quickly. Lewis and Clark were off on their adventures in the West, following a native guide, Sacagawea, all the way to the western shores of the continent. Just 2 months after Charity was born on July 4th, the town of Egremont celebrated Independence Day with food and a procession through town. Charity's grandfather, Joshua Sr., ever active in the community and the church, hosted a Baptist meeting at his inn. When Charity was just 3 years old, her grandfather and father, both named Joshua, signed a document to incorporate the Baptist Society of Egremont at a meeting on July 30th, 1808. In addition to both Joshua Millard Jr. and Sr., were several members of other Baptist families in the area, including more members of the Millard family. Before a church could be built in the community, congregants would worship in the Millard family barn. And in 1817, 2 pieces of land were offered for the site of a new church by Joshua Millard. The church was built, but the building was left unfinished until 1832. And parishioners worshipped with no plaster on the walls and beneath open rafters. The Millard family was so devout that Joshua Millard Sr.'s obituary in 1830 only mentions him within the context of his religion. It says, "For more than half a century," it reports, "Joshua has filled a prominent place in the Baptist church in this town, evincing through his long life an earnestness and uniformity in his attachment to the cause of Christ, through which being dead he yet speaketh. His end was peace." Charity grew up in a strict environment. The teachings of her parents did not allow, quote, frolicking or dancing, disorderly walking, speaking against the minister, gossiping, shaking dice, which is gambling, or committing slander. Just what disorderly walking means, I have no idea, but she was not allowed to do it. Women were to render, quote, due subjection to their husband. The Baptists of Massachusetts took their religion seriously, much as the Puritans of Plymouth did, and in 1847, an anti-slavery document was signed by 116 Baptist ministers. They practiced what they preached. If our Constitution and the Bible says all men are created equal, then the Baptists of Massachusetts complied. During Charity's childhood, she saw many changes to the world she lived in. When she was just 7, the War of 1812 began, and the Napoleonic Wars ended 3 years later in 1815. The Massachusetts Temperance Society held its first meeting in 1813. And in 1816, when she was 11, the year without a summer haunted all of New England. Frost was recorded in Waltham, Massachusetts as late as July 8th, thanks to the Mount Tambora volcano that erupted halfway around the world. Many people went hungry as crops failed. Some worried that it was the end times. The Millard family was prominent, influential, respected, and prosperous. When Charity's father, Joshua, passed away in 1851, he left her $700 in cash. That's about $23,000 in today's money. And Charity was not the only daughter to receive money from their father, but she did get the most, probably because she was his oldest daughter. Her sisters Abiah and Lydia were both left $500 apiece. Charity would remain close and lived close to her siblings all her life. Charity Ann Millard married Robert B. Brown, who was born just across the border in New York in 1801. The couple were blessed with 6 children: Martin, Robert, Horace, George, Laura, and Abner Brown. Robert was a devout man, too, and took farming as seriously as he did his religion. He served on the Agricultural Committee for several years and took pride in taking many prizes and ribbons at the Housatonic Agricultural Fair. He was also a volunteer delegate to the state convention in 1840. Thanks to the transcendentalists of the day, we have recorded appreciation for the beauty of Massachusetts. In 1843, Henry David Thoreau wrote of the evening stealing over the fields, the stars coming to bathe in retired waters, the shadows of the trees creeping farther and farther into the meadows. He brings to life the slow, natural lifestyle full of subtle beauty and grace. He wrote about an excursion in 1854 in which he says, "We were picking our way over quaking meadows and swamps, and occasionally slipping into the muddy batter mid-leg deep, jumping or fording ditches and brooks, forcing our way through dense blueberry swamps where there is water beneath and bushes above." Combined with writing like that and Norman Rockwell's paintings that came later, it's no wonder that we come to visualize rural Massachusetts as idyllic, wondrous, and unabashedly American. It's not known exactly when Charity Millard Brown began quilting, but as her husband Robert was raking in prizes at agricultural fairs for his animals and crops, Charity was recognized for her quilts. In the 1850 and 1860 census, Charity was living with her husband Robert and their children in Egremont. To get an idea of just how prosperous of a farmer Robert was, the non-population schedule of 1850 shows that at that time, Robert Brown owned 115 acres of land, 3 horses, 7 milk cows, 100 sheep, 5 pigs, 140 bushels of rye, 300 bushels of Indian corn, and 400 bushels of oats, which is like almost 13,000 pounds of oats. It also said that he had 3 other cattle. So I don't know what that's supposed to be, but he had 3 of them. The cash value of his farm was estimated at $7,500. That little enterprise that Robert had going on, if put in today's money, was worth about $300,000. The 100 sheep listed in his inventory are particularly interesting because at the time, the woolen manufacturing in Berkshire County produced 5,305,000 yards of fabric annually in the local mills. There were 921 looms running in 18 textile mills in Berkshire County in 1855 alone. Everything from cashmere to satinette to broadcloth and cotton were being manufactured. Robert Brown took second place at the agricultural fair that same year for having the best wool. It's logical to presume that some of his wool was being turned into cloth at the local mills, and his wife and daughter probably had access to a plentiful stock of quilting fabric. And just a few miles north of Egremont, a meeting would take place that would change the face of the literary world. Herman Melville, best known for his novel Moby Dick, had moved to Pittsfield, Massachusetts, and settled in a home that he named Arrowhead in view of Mount Greylock, which Melville said reminded him of a great whale. From 1850 to 1863, Melville would call the farm home, and it's where he would write, among other things, Moby Dick. On the afternoon of August 5th, 1850, in Great Barrington, American writer Nathaniel Hawthorne made an uncharacteristic decision. He went to a social gathering. A literary soiree, if you will. Hawthorne, who was extremely shy, was born the year before our quilter, Charity Millard Brown, and had recently moved to Berkshire County, where he rented a little red cottage and wrote The House of Seven Gables. At this point in his life, he was already a successful writer with the publication of The Scarlet Letter. David Dudley Field, a lawyer and legal writer in the Great Barrington area, organized the social event, inviting James T. Fields, who was Hawthorne's publisher, and his wife Eliza, Oliver Wendell Holmes, Cornelius Matthews, Herman Melville, and Everett Deiskink. On that day, Melville and Hawthorne would meet in a climb up Monument Mountain, and it would be the start of a precarious friendship. It was Hawthorne's suggestion to Melville, who was working on Moby Dick at the time, to make the book a bit more introspective, more philosophical. Up to that point, it had been more of a rollicking adventure book. The day was so impactful, so full of excitement, that 5 of the 10 people in attendance would go on to either write about the event in their journal or in private letters. Deiskink described the events in a letter to his wife, quote, "As we scrambled over the rocks at the summit, a black thundercloud from the south dragged its ragged skirts towards us. They talked of shelter, and shelter there proved to be, though it looked unpromising." Dr. Holmes cut 3 branches for an umbrella and uncorked the champagne, which was drunk from a silver mug. We scattered over the cliffs, Herman Melville to seat himself, the boldest of all, astride a projecting sprit of rock, while little Dr. Holmes peeped about the cliffs and protested it affected him like ipecac. I think in plain English, Duyskink was saying that the height of the cliff made Holmes nauseous, and Melville was quite cavalier in stepping out onto a tiny rock. Once the group reached the summit of the mountain, Cornelius Matthews read a poem about Monument Mountain written by William Cullen Bryant. Monument Mountain is a bit of a rock star in Berkshire County, no pun intended. According to Wikipedia, it's a 2.5-mile-long quartzite ridgeline with a 1,739-foot peak. Before the Europeans, the mountain was a sacred place to the Mohican people. Tribal members left stone offerings imbued with prayers on the mountain. Hawthorne, who was 14 years older than Herman Melville at the time, was in such good spirits that those in attendance who had known him for years commented on how unusual it was. The group took shelter from the storm in a cave, and after their soggy descent of Monument Mountain, the group returned to Field's house where the ladies had made dinner, and the meal took 3 hours to complete. Afterwards, the men all headed out to roam about the ice glen in Stockbridge, and miraculously they all survived unscathed, but not unchanged. Hawthorne's influence on Melville was so profound that Melville dedicated what is often considered the greatest of all American novels, Moby Dick, to his new friend and mentor, Nathaniel Hawthorne. And it all happened within a stone's throw of Charity Millard Brown's farm. Further afield from Massachusetts, the storm clouds of the Civil War were beginning to gather. Massachusetts was home to the Transcendentalist movement. Women's suffrage, temperance, and abolition were spoken on nearly every tongue. In 1856 in Berkshire County, the Pittsfield Guards gave their 3rd annual military ball. Music was performed by Hodges Band, and the military and fire companies attending were requested to wear their uniforms. One can only wonder how many of the boys who attended that ball would die in a few short years on a battlefield far away from their homes. The Pittsfield Library Association hosted Reverend Henry Ward Beecher for the 8th course of a lecture series that same year. Henry, the sister of Harriet Beecher Stowe, who wrote Uncle Tom's Cabin, was staunchly anti-slavery. And at the agricultural fair in 1859, our quilter, Charity Millard Brown, then 54 years old, got 2nd place for best bed quilt and a prize of $1. Unfortunately, the newspapers of the day rarely gave descriptions of the quilts at the fair unless it was to assign an adjective like neat or handsome, or unless the quilt had a lot of pieces. So unfortunately, we don't know what style or what pattern Charity used for her prize-winning quilt. We don't even know if it was made from cotton, wool, or silk. But at a different fair that same year, Charity's daughter Laura Brown, just 20 years old and not yet married, won Best Patchwork Coverlet or Quilt. The prize was $3, nearly $100 in today's money. It's likely that Charity had been quilting since she was very young. The first agricultural fair in Berkshire County was in 1811, and it's quite possible that Charity had been submitting quilts long before 1859. The fact that her daughter Laura made a quilt worthy of first place at age 20 shows that Charity had probably started teaching her years before. But Charity wasn't just a great quilter. In 1861, she won first place for the best rye bread in the county. When war was declared and the Civil War got underway, the Berkshire Woolen Company was given a contract to produce 20,000 yards of cloth a week for the U.S. Army. The first cloth of the contract was for 30,000 yards and was to be of, quote, the Army blue color and wool warped. A newspaper article said, quote, large quantities of wool have been ordered and another dyer has been sent for, and the necessary preparations are being made in order to fulfill this fat contract. A portion of the mills will be kept running both night and day, 2 sets of hands being employed. An estimated 150,000 Massachusetts men fought in the Civil War. Nearly 14,000 of them died. Berkshire County held many events to raise money for the war effort or to send items to the soldiers. After the war, thankful that no battles had ravaged their homes, And far away from the uncertain landscape that was Reconstruction in the South, the people of Berkshire County returned to normal life as quickly and seamlessly as they could. And even though Berkshire County was full of small textile mills and paper mills, it would hold on to that agrarian lifestyle, and it would keep its reputation as being the playground of the elite, full of natural beauty. However, the same could not be said for the eastern part of the state, where industrialization would change the countryside forever. But the story of the textile industry and the Lowell Mill girls is for another episode, not this one. According to the minimal public records available, Charity's life as the wife of a prosperous farmer continued unchanged until 1869, when her beloved husband Robert passed away from kidney disease. Robert provided for his widow, leaving her $2,000, all the household goods, one horse, harness, and wagon, and occupancy of the east room, a bedroom, necessary firewood, and, quote, the privilege of cultivating and use of part of the garden near the dwelling. The house and farm itself were left to their son Martin. And even though she was allowed the use of the garden and the bedroom and the east room, just a year later, the 1870 census finds Charity living with her sister Lydia and her brother-in-law Ira Lowry. And it's during the decade that follows that Charity begins work on the quilt that now resides in the Henry Ford Museum. In 1876, the United States celebrated its first 100 years as a country. The centennial celebrations were a raucous event throughout the nation, where most residents gathered for parades, picnics, and fireworks. Berkshire County was no different. There was even a local man who thought it was a good idea to steal a cannon. Schools planted trees, special songs were composed, concerts were given. In Great Barrington, just a few miles from Egremont, there was a fantastic parade, fireworks, and even a reading of the Declaration of Independence. In West Stockbridge, there was a foot and potato race and a baseball game. And Charity, with her children, grandchildren, and siblings, would have been in the thick of it. The country and Massachusetts in the summer of 1876 had been very patriotic indeed. By 1880, Charity returned to living with her son, Martin. The quilt that Charity made and was lovingly kept and donated to the museum is a pieced pattern made of 30 squares in what is known today as a Lemoyne star. In New England, the pattern was often identified as a Puritan star, and sometimes it's even known as a lemon star. Since the pattern was named after two brothers, Pierre and Jean-Baptiste Lemoyne, who founded New Orleans, it's possible that quilters in the North just had no idea what a Lemoyne was and interpreted the name as lemon. Everybody's heard of a lemon, after all. The Lemoyne star is not usually a pattern for beginners because the 8 points of the star are set with squares and triangles on a 45-degree angle, and the technique of sewing what is known as a Y-seam is used. Y-seams on a sewing machine can be tricky. Incidentally, a Lemoyne star was the pattern I chose for my very first quilt that I made in 1992, only I pieced mine by hand, thank goodness, and I'm probably in the minority, but I find the Y-seams easier to stitch by hand than by machine. Nowadays, an ingenious quilter figured out how to get the same effect of the star by using half-square triangles, thereby avoiding having to use Y-seams at all. From what I can gather, the first time a Lemoyne Star pattern was published was in 1894 in Ohio Farmers Magazine, but the pattern had been in use decades before that. There is a Lemoyne Star quilt in the New York Metropolitan Museum of Art made by Rebecca Davis and dated to 1847. There is also a Lemoyne Star quilt in the Smithsonian that dates to between 1840 and 1860. Closer to Egremont, there was a Lemoyne Star quilt also dated to between 1840 and 1860, found in a trunk on a homestead in Massachusetts. And in the New England Quilt Museum, there is a stunning Lemoyne Star made by Penelope Carpenter. Charity's Lemoyne Star quilt measures 84.5 inches by 74 inches. The stars are scrappy, made of various bits of browns and pinks, with the four corner blocks being the same and made from scraps of yellow fabrics. The sashing is what really sets this quilt apart from just your average Lemoyne Star. It's called a garden maze setting made with pink calico. The way the garden maze setting joins the blocks with crisscrossing intersections, it gives the illusion of a circular octagon around each block. The border is made from a pink calico applique ribbon with green leaves and small red buds also made from calico. The binding is also made from the same pink fabric. The quilting is all over dense. The back of the quilt is a white cream color with an inscription in the upper left corner that says, "Pieced by Charity Millard Brown, 1805 to 1892, sister of Abiah Millard Lowry, 1806 to 1891. It's not known who made the inscription, but it was most likely somebody in Abiah's family because, why point out the relationship between the two women otherwise? Charity's quilt was donated by Helen B. Green to the Henry Ford Museum in Dearborn, Michigan. The museum has attributed the date of 1880 to the quilt. The quilt is in excellent condition despite some discoloration. If the date is correct, that means Charity was 75 years old when she made it. But it's the use of pink in this quilt that just uplifts it from just being a run-of-the-mill scrap quilt. The double pinks, which is when tiny cinnamon pink motifs or patterns are printed on a solid pink background, and the calico pinks were popular at the time. Pink is a color that struggled to be named for a long time. Often in historical times, it was just called light red or rose. It was used in the 15th century to create skin tones in paintings and frescoes. In Florence, Italy, in the mid-1400s, Fra Angelico's famous fresco of the Virgin Mary getting the news she was pregnant from the Archangel Gabriel, Gabriel is depicted in a lush pink robe. And he's also depicted with way cool polychromatic wings, by the way. The painter Cennino Cennini described pink as a blend between Venetian red and St. John's white. But because red was considered a masculine color, usually the symbol for fire, blood, war, and power, light red was considered a masculine color too. It was a favorite of both the men and the women of the bourgeoisie. And in the 18th century, Madame de Pompadour, famous mistress of Louis XV, was often portrayed in shades of pink and blue. She loved pink so much that she ordered a special shade of pink to be made by the Savoy Porcelain Company. This is also known as Pompadour pink, and please forgive my French pronunciations. In the 20th century, pink became synonymous with the feminine, due in large part, but not entirely, to Barbie. Pink is now often seen as sort of a double-edged sword. It's both seductive and innocent. Elvis Presley had a famous pink Cadillac. Monet and Degas both used the color in amazing, unforgettable ways. And who can forget Marilyn Monroe's pink dress in Gentlemen Prefer Blondes, or Jackie Kennedy's raspberry pink Chanel dress suit? One dress was the symbol of female sexuality at its peak, the other prim, controlled, and forever a symbol of an American tragedy. The newspapers of Berkshire County occasionally commented on the quilt gatherings in the last decade of Charity's life. The ladies of the Benevolent Society provided a basket lunch and a quilting party to benefit the Chapel Fund in Pittsfield in 1886. And in 1888, the ladies of the Methodist Aid Society had quilting and a supper in their parlor. And in 1889, the term quilting bee was used to describe a gathering of the ladies of Howland Mission. The achievements of local residents were also occasionally commented upon, like 12-year-old Ellen Purchase of Pittsfield, Massachusetts, who won an award for her quilt of, quote, 2,226 pieces, all tastefully arranged and neatly sewn. And in 1871, one woman, who the paper didn't see fit to actually name, finished a silk bed quilt containing 5,576 pieces. That's one woman who should have been named. And so we come to the twilight of Charity's life. In her later years, it was reported that she had some decline in cognitive ability. Her sister Abiah died just 6 months before she did in 1891, and her sister Lydia followed in 1894. Perhaps to illustrate how well respected and loved Charity and her family were, instead of just a name and date listed under deaths in the newspaper, Charity was given a full paragraph obituary. It said in part, quote, Mrs. Brown died at the home of the late Frank Loomis. She was 87 years of age. Her mind failed some 2 or 3 years ago, but she will long be kindly remembered by those to whom she had endeared herself by a gentle, loving Christian life. She was buried at Riverside Cemetery. Because her family thought of donating her quilt, and because Charity's work was of such a quality that the museum gladly accepted it, we are able to learn of her life and appreciate her mark on a country and a way of life which has long passed into the halls of history. I don't think I speak out of turn when I say that I imagine Charity made more than one quilt worthy of a museum. Oh, that I could go back in time and see them all. I will leave us with the words of Thoreau. I am the autumnal sun, with autumn gales my race is run. When will the hazel put forth its flowers, or the grape ripen under my bowers? When will the harvest or the hunter's moon turn my midnight into mid-noon? I am all sere and yellow, and to my core mellow. The mast is dropping within my woods, the winter is lurking within my moods, and the rustling of the withered leaf is the constant music of my grief. 1840. This podcast was researched, written, and hosted by me, Loretta Allen. You can find Seems Like History on Instagram and YouTube, where I have made a video with images to accompany this podcast. That's Seems Like History, SEAMS. I would like to thank the Henry Ford Museum for the images of Charity Millard Brown's quilt, as well as the New York Metropolitan Museum of Art and the New England Quilt Museum. I would also like to thank whoever's family tree it was that I found the image of Charity Millard Brown. I couldn't really tell what the name on the family tree was, but thank you. It was up on Ancestry, and that just made my whole day. Textiles are perishable, so it is of the utmost importance that these old quilts be documented and preserved. Let's give a voice to those ghosts from the past. Join me next time when I take us to the first couple of decades in the 20th century in Rowan County, North Carolina, and we take a look at Mittie Barrier's Barnyard Quilt.